Well, today is July 15th, 2016, and we're interviewing Candy Gann at the American Legion State Convention. Candy is 56 years old, having been born on July 22nd, 1959. Kathy Fulks will be the court reporter for this interview, excuse me. Candy, for the record, would you please state what war and branch of service that you served?
I served in the United States Army during Desert Shield, Desert Storm, First Gulf War.
Well, let's start with some little background data on you. Where and when were you born?
I was born July 22nd, 1959 in Havana, Illinois. Lived there my whole life. The only time I haven't lived in Illinois was when I was on active duty and gone with the military. After I got out of the military, I came back.
Okay. So can you tell us a little bit about your parents, maybe what were their occupations, and then also if you had siblings, what were their names?
My mom and dad, my dad's name is Ted Jackson, born and raised in Illinois. My mom is Sally Jackson, born and raised in Illinois. I have a brother who passed away in 1981 while on active duty with the U.S. Army. I have an older sister, Cindy, and a younger sister, Kathy.
And what were you doing before you entered the service?
I entered the military right out of high school. Small town, not really a lot of options. My brother was active duty and basically said if I wanted to do anything with my life, college was an option. And my brother said that, convinced me that I should go in the military. And so it was my brother who talked me into doing the military. Actually went in with the intentions of just doing 3 years and getting out because I wanted to be a flight attendant. I wanted to fly. And so I did my first 3 years and applied for flight attendant school, and I got rejected because I wasn't tall enough. And I had no other plans, so I just re-enlisted and just kept re-enlisting. So.
Okay. And why did you choose the Army?
Because my brother was in the Army. Yep, the Army was the only branch that he would let me go into.
Okay. So do you recall your first days, like from when you signed up and then entered into basic training? What was that like, and how were you feeling at that time?
Terrified, because I came from Havana, which the population was about 4,000 people. I went through the MEP station in St. Louis. I'd never flown before. The first time I was ever on an airplane is when I went back to St. Louis and they put me on an airplane to go to Fort McClellan, Alabama. And so that's where I went to basic training at. And I remember they picked us up in a bus at the airport, and we got there. It was evening, and we got off the bus, and it was, oh my gosh, what have I done? I probably cried for the first 3 days. When I went in 1977, it was still the Women's Army Corps. So when I went in, I am actually a WAC, and so mine was the very last unit where the women were in a platoon all by themselves, and we were separated from the men, and we actually had a different basic training than what the men did, and mine was the very last group that did that. But I was actually issued the Pallas Athena brass, and I am actually a member of the Women's Army Corps Veterans Association. So but it was terrifying because I'd never been away from home, but it didn't take very long to realize that everybody down there was in the same boat as me. So it was.
So were there any memorable trainers or instructors during your basic training that you remember?
Drill Sergeant Pritchett. Her name was Cindy Pritchett, and I can't tell you what we used to call her, but we called her Pritch. But she was hard. But I think that I was successful in the military because of her. She, after I was out of basic training and I wasn't living under her rules, I was able to realize that so many of the things that I did in the military, so many of the ways that I reacted to things all came back from what she taught us and her leadership style in basic training, and it stayed with me for 20 years. And she was, so Drill Sergeant Cindy Pritchett, and I remember her.
What about friendships? Did you make friendships during basic that lasted through your, for a while or through your career?
I don't really think so, because I was really just, now I'm outgoing, but then I wasn't, and everything intimidated me, and I just never really opened up to people. I mean, you know, there were people that I would classify them as acquaintances. We were just in the same boat. We were in boot camp together, but I never made any lasting, nobody that I was really close to, nobody that I confided in or anything like that. It was just shell shock.
So you're getting through or going through basic training and or getting to the end of that. What was next for you? Did you have advanced training that you took?
Yeah. They let us go on leave. I was able to go on leave for a period of time because my school date that I was to go to, I actually went to advanced individualized training at NTT Corey Station in Pensacola, Florida. It's actually a naval base. So I actually went to a Navy school for my training, and I went in the military as a non-Morse intercept operator, military intelligence. And I remember when I went to MEP station, they gave us a test down there, and it was called an INT. They gave you, it was 3 letters, the letter I, the letter N, the letter T. And that was the test, and you had to, it was Morse code, and you had to take this test. And I remember getting done with it, and I remember telling the people down there, because of my scores, it was leaning I was going into military intelligence. And I remember after I got done with that, I told them, I said, I don't want to copy code. Do not want to copy code. So the guy goes, okay, fine, we won't send you to Morse code school. We're going to send you to non-Morse school. I said, awesome, I can do that. I said, what is that? So he told me it's printers. I said, okay, I can do that. So got to Pensacola, Florida for my schooling, got in process and everything. The very first day of school, they set us down, they handed us headsets. And I said, what's this for? They said, well, you have to learn Morse code. Very first thing for the first 6 weeks of school, Morse code. All we did was learn Morse code. And I'm like, I don't do Morse code. And they said, yes, you do. So, and I struggled. It was not easy for me to learn Morse code, and it never got easy for me to learn and actually copy code. But part of my job I had to do was copy code. And so, but I remember that I remember telling that guy, I don't want to copy code, and him saying, you won't have to, we're going to send you to non-Morse school. Okay, so yeah, that was another little wonderful thing about what they tell you and what actually is.
All right, so you finished your advanced training, and what happened next?
When I went into the military, my contract guaranteed me my first duty assignment was Okinawa, Japan. Why I thought I wanted to go to Okinawa, Japan for my first duty assignment is beyond me. But after I went to, my schooling was from October of 77 to June of 78 was how long I was actually in school. And so my first duty assignment was Okinawa, Japan. And so I got over there in June of '78. And you want to talk about a cultural shock? Yeah, out for somebody coming from Midwest Illinois, a little bitty town like Havana, and got on an airplane and flew to Okinawa, Japan. Oh my goodness. And what made it even worse is the very next month, the very beginning of July, is when the agreement with the United States and Japan happened. Mm-hmm. And they gave Japan back, or Okinawa back to Japan, and they switched the roads. They made them go from American, where he drove on the right, where Japan drives on the left. So that was all happening, and it was really interesting. I mean, and so my very first duty assignment was in a foreign country, and they sent us to language, so we had a little bit of immersion, Japanese, so that you could at least ask some questions, and they taught us about exchanging our US dollars for yen, mm-hmm. and how to use the bus system and stuff like that. And it was for someone, with my background and everything, it was pretty overwhelming. But I had good people. We worked in they called it the box, and it was a 24-hour day mission, 7 days a week, and they call hurricanes over there typhoons. And we went through several of them, and when you go through a typhoon, they lock you down. So, you worked in this thing called the box. It was inside a chain link fence with concertina wire around it. MPs are armed, no windows, and during typhoons and stuff, they tell you to bring your bag. And the longest I got locked in it, I think we were locked in one time for 6 days. And so, but it was all just an experience for somebody that came from my background. It was just an overwhelming experience at the time, but as I look back on it now, I think there's so many wonderful things that I never would have experienced had I not gone into the military. I love the military. I love having been in it. I love being a veteran. I'm proud of it.
So, what about friendships and that during your time in Okinawa? Was that any different? Were you still a little, shy, like you said, or not real forward, or were you able to open up a little bit by then?
Yeah, that first, I met a family. Actually, I met him in Florida, in Pensacola, and his name was Jerry, and he was married to a Marine, and we were over there, and it was pretty nice, and we did that, and then I had some pretty good friends over there. I went to Okinawa twice, and it's really, sometimes I'm not clear as to when. I don't remember when I knew him. Did I know him the first time I was in Okinawa? Did I know him the second time I was in Okinawa? The first time I was in Okinawa, it was pretty much, all MI, and I hung around with the MPs, and why, I have no idea, but most of my friends were actually the MPs. I don't know, I guess maybe I worked with these MI guys and I just didn't want to hang out with them too, but so I had a few friends, but I really don't have them where I stay in touch with them. I've gone my way and they've gone their way, and life just sometimes interferes with friendship sometimes. So
how about did you adjust to the food in Okinawa?
They had a couple of restaurants right across the street from Torrey Station. One of them was the Royal. These things I remember, and the other one was called the Azuma. And the best thing they have is tacos, and the shells were made out of rice, and yummy, yummy. And we used to have gyoza and spring rolls, and they were open late. And when you worked those late shifts, you could go up. You'd make. If somebody had a car, not everybody, you didn't have cars. I mean, you took the bus or you buddied up, and so somebody'd make a run up to the Royal, and they'd come back with these great big huge bags full of food, and we would be sitting there, and the watch commander would always come through, and when you made it, you had to go for everybody. Whoever was in the box. And it would, you'd have to make that run, and so everybody got, but yeah. And they had a Kobe steakhouse, and oh my goodness. I mean, they have them here in the United States where they cook the food in front of you. Nothing compares to what it was like over there. I mean, that's the first time I was ever exposed to Kobe beef or Kobe steak, and it was, my favorite place to eat though was Pizza Hut. They had a Pizza Hut there. And then they had some really nice steakhouse. I always found American food. I never really got into the Japanese food, and even now my husband loves and my daughter loves going out to the Chinese restaurant or the other restaurants. Mm-hmm. But I always managed to find the American. I am American through and through. Red, white, and blue. Cut me and I bleed blue blood. I mean, and even though I was in Okinawa for 2 tours, it was American food. Pizza Hut. I love Pizza Hut.
All right, so as your time wrapped up in Okinawa, then where did you go?
I went to Fort Meade, Maryland, to the National Security Agency, and I worked at NSA for, let's see, got 79, the end of 79, I think, 80. I got there in maybe January of 80, and I was stationed there. I met my first husband during that tour at Fort Meade, Maryland. He was MI also. He was a 98 Charlie. I was a 98K. And he worked at the agency. I worked in the agency. And we just met him. We got married in April. The end of April. I can't even tell you when, but it was on a Saturday, and a week later I got a phone call from my parents telling me my brother had been killed in a car accident. He had just been accepted into the Special Forces, and he was a recruiter over in Galesburg, and he had just got his letter. He came home and told Mom and Dad that he was coming back on active duty because he was in the reserves at the time. He was coming back on active duty. And he had been selected to go to the Special Forces qualification course, and they had gone out for his friends, they were going to have a big party for him, and he was killed in a car accident, along with 5, there were 6 people in the car, and 5 of them, all the boys, perished in the car accident, and there was one girl, and she survived it. And everything just fell apart. How I survived that period in time, I don't think I would have, except I had a commander. His name was Joel J. Contrucci. Spell that. Ooh, but anyway, yes, I can. But Contrucci. His first name was Joel. He was a captain. He was my company commander. I remember when I came home after the funeral and stuff that I had this brave front that I was okay and everything, and he didn't buy it. And you know, I was married at the time. My husband didn't go home with me when my brother died. He basically put me on an airplane and he said, I can't do this. It brings back to me memories of when his brother had been killed and had died. And so our marriage didn't survive that. And that commander, I probably wouldn't even be here if it wouldn't have been for him. He saw things in me and things that were going on with me that I didn't realize myself. And he ordered me to go to counseling. And it was, but anyway, it was not a good time. And that was in May of '81, and in September of '81, I came down on order. I went back to Okinawa in September, and it was too soon. It was too soon to make that kind of a move. And my husband and I, we didn't make, our marriage didn't last that. And so we parted ways, and it was rough. But I had really good friends over there. It just so happened they were our friends. It was like this mass exodus. Everybody that was together at Fort Meade, we all went to Okinawa. There was like 3 or 4 couples, and we all, at the same time, we all went to Okinawa. But it was, that was the second time I was in Okinawa, and actually, my husband and I, we were separated. I came back and we divorced. And I guess a lot of military people don't have one marriage that lasts the whole military career. But in April of 1984, the U.S. government reactivated First Special Forces Group. And 1st Battalion of 1st Special Forces Group was being sent to Okinawa, Japan, to Tori Station, because the field station where I worked was closing. They were remoting it, and it was closing, and they were moving us out, MI, and they were moving SF in. You want to talk about different ends of the spectrum as far as military. You have MI and SF. Oh my goodness. But anyway, I met my husband the day they landed on island. Their sergeant major and our sergeant major said, we're going to get these guys together from the get-go, and they had this big shindig at the NCO club, and so they brought all MI in and all these SF guys in, and had this big old thing. And I met him that night. That was Friday, April the 13th, 1984, is when I met him. And we're still together. We're still together. He is my soulmate. And when you think about it, he's from Naples, Florida. I'm from Havana, Illinois. And we met in Okinawa, Japan. So, and when they closed the field station in 1985, they closed us out, and all the MI, we left. I was on my command was really sympathetic, and and so even though we weren't married at the time, they let me stay, and I was on the last airplane, just about virtually the last airplane out of Okinawa, and I was actually going back to Fort Meade. So I went for my first Okinawa, Fort Meade, back to Okinawa, back to Fort Meade. So, but Paul, he stayed on Okinawa, but we weren't married at the time, and he was on leave. When I left, he wasn't even on island. He was on leave back on the East Coast someplace, and when I got home flew home after I was going to be, because I was going to be home over Christmas. My leave was 30 days and it covered Christmas. And I flew in to Peoria. My mom and dad picked me up and they said, oh yeah, by the way, Paul's coming here. He had called my parents he was out on the East Coast, and he called my parents and said, can I come spend Christmas with you guys? And he goes, I'm going to spend Christmas with Candy. He goes, and so my family opened up, and he came down and spent Christmas with us, and we got engaged before he had to go back to Okinawa. And so we got engaged, and he went to Okinawa, and I went to Fort Meade. Fort Meade. So, yeah. Yep, and then in June of '86, he came back from Okinawa. I came back from Fort Meade, met in Havana, got married, spent together a week, and he went back to Okinawa, and I went back to Fort Meade. First year we were married, we didn't live together.
And how was that?
The Army.
Yeah, how was that for you?
We didn't fight. They said the hardest year is the first year because you were adapting. We never fought. We were never together. He and the Army, very understanding, because my MOS is not at Fort Bragg. My MOS is not. And but I had a branch manager that was sympathetic. He goes, okay. He says, I'm going to let you go to Fort Bragg. He said, I'm going to let you go to Fort Bragg for 1 year. That's what you're going to get. So in January of '87, Paul came back, and he was stationed at Fort Bragg in '87. So between January and June, I was making lots of trips up and down Interstate 95 between Fort Meade, Maryland, and Fort Bragg. But the Army, and why? Because now it's like, I don't know, but they did. They agreed to send me to Fort Bragg, and oh my gosh, I did not know what I was asking for. Fort Bragg is something out of an MI soldier's worst nightmare. And I did not want to go airborne, and I was in an airborne unit, and I was what they commonly, affectionately not referred to as a leg. And but we moved in together May 27th of 1987, and we were like, our 1 year anniversary was June the 7th. So we were like, what, 2 weeks shy of our 1 year anniversary when we actually moved in together. And so we were at Fort Bragg from then until 1991. So that 1 year, they kept letting me stay, and they just didn't move me. But I was actually on orders to go to Germany when Desert Storm, when the Gulf War all blew up and everything. So I was going to go to Germany, and I don't know what we were going to do. They weren't, because SF was not sending Paul to Germany, and we were going to be separated for whatever that length of time was. We were going to be separated. But we ended up, I got sent to Desert Shield at Desert Storm, and he didn't. He was at the John F. Kennedy Warfare Center, and they're a non-deploying unit, and so they didn't go. And I know that it was really crazy, because I was going and he wasn't, and he was not happy about that at all. But I remember that I worked at the Brigade S3 at Fort Bragg, and I did all the load plans for our brigade. I was the one that actually took the schematics of the airplanes and said, okay, this is what we're shipping. The battalions would tell me what they want, what they were sending, and and 18th Airborne Corps would say, okay, you've got these airplanes, you got this much space on airplanes, okay, tell us how you're going to load it. and you'd have to take the plans up to 18th Airborne Corps and say, okay, here's my plan, and they would run it in, and they would tell you how much of the airplane you were utilizing, and it had to be within a certain percentage of 100%, because, and if it wasn't, you have to go back and redo it. And so, I mean, that was something that I had absolutely no experience doing, but you learn by trial and error. But we got our unit over there, and I was there from August 31st of 1990 to April of 1991. And so it was interesting. It was interesting. Hotter than blazes during the day, and freezing cold at night. Water would freeze. If you left water in a bucket, it would freeze at night. So, but.
So, from that time then, where did you go next?
After Desert Storm, came back. April, came back to Fort Bragg, and while I was gone in Desert Storm, SF had moved Paul. So when I came back to Fort Bragg, he was gone. They had transferred him to Hawaii, and I didn't know what was going to happen to me. When I came back, contacted my branch manager, and I said, am I going back on orders to Germany? Am I going back to? And he goes, well, where's your husband? I said, well, he's in Hawaii. He goes, I can send you to Hawaii. He says, we have a field station Kinea. He goes, you want to go to field station Kinea? I said, well, yeah, if it means I'm going to be with Paul. Yeah, I do. So the Army once again, they came through again, and Paul came back, and we packed up everything. We packed up the house. We packed up, and I moved to Hawaii also. So he was stationed at Fort Shafter, and I was stationed. My unit was at Schofield Barracks, but I worked at a place called Kinea, and it was actually inside of a mountain. It had a tunnel that was 1.5 miles from the mouth of the tunnel back to the actual operations center. Was like about a half a mile, quarter mile to half a mile, and that you had to walk that anytime you went to and from work, and this huge staircase that you had to walk up to get to the mouth of this tunnel. And that's where I worked. So once again, I was working someplace that had absolutely no windows. But
and what was your job there?
I was a platoon sergeant for. It was a remote collection site. So it was an intelligence collection site that was a remote. And so I was a platoon sergeant, and I basically worked from 6:30 in the morning till 2:30 in the afternoon is what my shift was. And both of my daughters were born while we were stationed in Hawaii. One was born March of '92, and our second daughter was born July. One was born March 8th, then July 8th, '92 and '93, exactly 16 months apart. And so it was interesting. Paul was. He wasn't in a unit that deployed. It was a staff position there, and he worked different things. And he would go places, but he wouldn't deploy like he did when he was on an A team, like he did when he was in Okinawa. He was gone all the time when he was in Okinawa, but not in Hawaii. It was pretty much a staff job, and he was there, and he did that because we were going to be able to be together. And so when it came time and they wanted to put him back on a team, SF wanted to put him back on a team, and they sent him, they were sending him to Fort Campbell, Kentucky. Well, when I called up the Army at that time and said, okay, he's going to Kentucky, what am I going to do? And he goes, well, you're not going to Kentucky. He says, that's not going to happen. He said, we sent you to Fort Bragg. He says, we're not going to send you to Kentucky. He said, you can go to Pensacola, Florida as an instructor, or you can go to Fort Huachuca, Arizona as an instructor. He goes, what do he goes, what do you want to do? He says, you have your choice. And I said, but that's not good choices. He goes, well, you can be, quote, you can be separated from your husband, or you can be separated from the Army. That's what he told me. He said, your choice. He goes, but I will give you a choice of where you want to go. He goes, because you got 3 years. He goes, you're due to leave Okinawa anyway. He goes, or not Okinawa, but Hawaii. He goes, so you can choose. That was in February of '94 that I left Hawaii. Andrew was born in July of '93, so you do the math. How old was she? So I had 17 years then, and there's no flipping way I was going to give up 17 years. And so I said, okay.
They're not that.
It's okay, keep going.
He said, so I chose to go to Fort Huachuca because I had both my sisters were in Southern California.
Mm-hmm.
So I figured Fort Huachuca was like an 8-hour drive to where my sisters lived.
Mm-hmm.
So I figured that's where I would go. And so Paul was at Fort Campbell, Kentucky, and I was at Fort Huachuca, Arizona, and I had 2 little ones. I wasn't a sole parent, but I wasn't a single parent, but I was a sole parent. And it was tough. It was tough. I wanted to be a first sergeant, but I couldn't be. Because you can't be a first sergeant if you got 2 little bitty kids, and you can't, get up at 2 o'clock in the morning because PFC Jones is down at the local jail because he had one too many days and got into a bar fight. They expect first sergeants to be able to get up out of bed and go do whatever they need to do. So I couldn't be a first sergeant. Basically, that made the decision for me that I was at the end of my career, that I wasn't going to go any longer than 20 years because, I was lucky that my kids were born when I was a senior NCO, and it wasn't as hard as it would have been had they been born when I was a specialist or an E5 or something like that. So, it was okay. But I knew that I was at the end of my ropes. But I did get promoted when I was out at Fort Huachuca, and a lady that I admire more than the most, General Claudia Kennedy. She was my brigade commander, the 703rd and my brigade commander in Kenya, and I knew her then. And when I went to Fort Huachuca, she was there at the intelligence school, and very, very, very impressive lady. She promoted me to master sergeant, and that was one of the most memorable things, other than my husband and meeting my husband and my kids, is my relationship with General Kennedy. And she was really awesome, and she's the one that talked me into staying, or when I was in Kenya, and there was a time after I had my kids that I was going to get out because it was just, I didn't feel like I was doing my kids justice. And she's like, oh no, you're not. She says, I am not going to let you leave the military, not at this point. And I did stay, and I'm so thankful. I'm so thankful that she saw better than me what was a good thing for me. And so, but and then eventually SF sent Paul to Yuma, Arizona. They moved the military free-fall school from Fort Bragg, where it was too subject to climate and stuff, and they moved it out to Yuma. So we ended up basically from Fort Huachuca, which is Tucson, to Yuma, that distance. And so we were actually within the same state again. And and I finished up and I retired from the military in June of 1997, and I turned 38 in July. So, and then in August I went to my 20-year class reunion, and they asked me, well, what are you doing? I said, I'm retired. Well, how can you be retired? This is just our 20-year class reunion. I said, I'm retired. I'm retired. With full benefits, I'm retired. And Paul retired in they sent him back to Fort Campbell. And when I retired, I went, the girls and I went to Fort Campbell. And the last year he was on active duty, 97 and 99, 2 years. We were at Fort Campbell with him as civilians. I was a civilian. I was a military wife, and for 2 years. And then when he retired from the military, we came back to Illinois. And we have made Illinois our home since 1999. And I feel like I've lived a pretty charmed life. I had good things, and I had good experiences and bad experiences in the Army, but a lot of the experiences that I would consider bad weren't really because of the military. It was just things. I lost my brother and just different things, and the relationship with my first husband. That wasn't the military's fault, but I am active in the American Legion. I am active I'm actually the post commander right now. I'm the first female post commander for my post. I am the service officer for the VFW, so I provide services to veterans all over Mason County and we actually are one of none VFW post that actually has a VA veteran service officer that comes to our post and provides services to our veterans in our county. And I set that up. I did that. I did that. I'm on the Veterans Assistance Commission for our county. So I love my vets. I do the ceremonies on Memorial Day and Veterans Day. I plan those. I set those up. I do those ceremonies. If it's a veteran, if you come to Mason County and you ask somebody, I need to talk about veterans, who do I need to talk to? They'll tell you Candy Gann, because I love my vets, and I'm proud of it. I'm proud of my husband's 20 years. I'm 20 years, and everything I have, everything I am, is because of the time that I spent in the military. I love it.
Well, if you had one message that you could leave for future generations who might hear or view your interview, what would that be?
That this is the greatest country on earth. You can't judge this country by the politicians. You have to judge this country by the heart of the people. And basically, the people are really good. And the people that serve in the military, while it's just a small percentage of it, those people will fight and they will die for whatever the rights that everybody else thinks that they're due. There's a very small percentage of our total population that will put themselves into harm's way to defend those rights that people think are their God-given right. They're not their God-given rights. They're rights that are given to them and protected by the people that put on the uniform, whether it's an Army uniform, a Marine uniform, an Air Force or Navy or Coast Guard. Those are the people that give them those rights. And they're not, I'm sorry, they're not God-given. They're given to you, and they're protected, and they're ensured that you have them every day by the people that wear that uniform. And you have to understand that that breed of person that puts on that uniform and that's willing to be separated from their family, or that's willing to go to some foreign country where they don't even speak the language. And you need to honor them, and you need to be respectful of them, and you need to thank them every time that you see them. Because you're living in a country that they've given you, not the politicians.
Candy, I want to thank you so much for your willingness to come and participate in the interview, and thank you for your service to our country.
Well, thank you. Thank you for inviting me to do this.